Like it or not, drones are the future of warfare, and to be honest, we're still catching up. In just the last few months, we've seen Iranian Shahed drones penetrate U.S. and partner air defense, resulting in casualties in the Middle East. Hezbollah has been using low-cost FPVs to hit Israeli equipment in southern Lebanon, and an al-Qaeda affiliate in Africa just took out Russian positions that, shockingly, were not prepared to counter the same drone threat they deal with daily in Ukraine. Our adversaries are adopting this technology and adapting to the modern battlefield, so should we. So today we're chatting with two defense industry leaders that are helping forge the path to what the Pentagon hopes will be American drone dominance. Phil Divinski is the CEO of Jeddoc and a U.S. Army Special Operations veteran of 16 years with 8 combat deployments. Also, my West Point classmate, class 2009. How about that for a small world? And Garrett Smith, the CEO of Reveal Technology, has spent more than 20 years in the Marine Corps in roles ranging from infantryman to Reconnaissance Company Commander. Now, you might have seen these guys before on Vet TV's Battle Lab, where they put these new tactics and technologies to the test to see how they can be best utilized by the U.S. military. It's a great series that I think will help highlight exactly what we're getting into here, and you can get a free month at the link in the description below by using promo code Preston. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Phil, Garrett, thank you guys so much for taking the time. We're going to link the Battle Lab kind of review in the description below and where people can go check that out. But that's what we're talking about today is kind of this. It's interesting. It's blending entertainment, but also these new technologies that we're trying to, I think we're all on the same page here, trying to push these out to the force in numbers. So, Phil, if we can start with you, you were running through these iterations. Was there anything during that first season of Battle Lab that kind of challenged your assumptions, or you went in thinking one thing and came out the other end with a different understanding or appreciation for some of these technologies?
Yeah. So from a macro, like experimentation and developing new tactics and techniques standpoint, our approach really has morphed across multiple seasons. So in the first season, we really focused on how do we create different teams, but put them in a position of offense and defense, and then see, based on their like initial conditions, what kind of technology they have on hand, what's the size of their fighting force, how does that affect their tactics, techniques, and then how they're employing that technology. In the second season, we created like teams and then did the flip-flop of offense, defense as well. And in the third season, we've morphed into combining the teams and then having an opposition element that has similar capabilities. But by combining those teams, we get more into maneuver and the whole principles of support and then assault. And so initially what we learned is using that disparate setup, but having the actual force on force, but changing the position of it, it was really useful to understand how the technology matched up against each other and what were really the advantages and disadvantages, but it didn't necessarily showcase the tactics and create like a normalization of that. So as we created and we moved more towards that, combining the teams into the support and assault, we've really, I think, found or cracked the code of that balance between how do we assess the technology, but also how do we unload and unlock the different tactics and techniques that enable that technology to be best employed based on the feedback we're getting. From a tactical standpoint, first and foremost, I expected a lot more standoff, a lot more focus on how do we have a support element that can range and support our assault element from way away from the objective. We've actually worked more towards contingency. So we've learned over and over again, having that support element actually closer towards last covered and concealed position is still important. But what we do is we have that contingency, that pacing list of if we can have standoff, great, but we need to be ready to ultimately employ more of a direct fire weapon system or throw down the tech that we have and then immediately move into the assault ourselves in order to support it. So although the technology continues to increase, the overall big takeaway is that we still have to be able to do kind of basic infantry tasks and be ready to morph back into that small arms fight, especially when it comes to seizing and holding terrain.
Yeah, the season and holding. So there was a kind of viral clip from Ukrainian President Zelensky this week. He talked about unmanned ground vehicles for the first time ever took terrain. And it made for some great media, but then a lot of people, Ukrainian soldiers, spoke up and they said, listen, it's not really a thing. They can be there for a period of time, but that battery dies and all of a sudden you don't hold the terrain. So there's still the human element that's needed here. But kind of sticking with that, Garrett, interested in your thoughts here. From watching the show, we saw the guys kind of fumble through iterations, right? From the first one to the third, fourth, fifth, they didn't jump immediately into what we're kind of seeing on the battlefields right now of Ukraine. Is that intentional? Was that just for show, like in this show, or is that kind of how you talk with clients through this as well, to kind of move through and let them see what doesn't work before they get to what does work?
Yeah. So first, thanks for having us on. And I think the value proposition from our standpoint, the reason why Reveal Technology, a technology company, is investing in and supporting and producing the Battle Lab series is because we saw a giant gap in the market around defense technology companies building things in a vacuum that were never tested or not tested early enough with live force on force user feedback. And the thing that results from that kind of a product development flow is you're building the wrong thing that eventually doesn't wrap into the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adopting unit or the echelon that you're intending to deliver value to. So that's why we were investing in this. So a product development proposition, basically, and to accelerate the adoption of technology over the long term. So what we noticed was that an edutainment kind of footing, a high production value offering was a way, maybe not the way, maybe not the best way, and for sure things are going to change, but it was a way to reach a target audience that we wanted to reach, that we wanted to engage in this community, so that the best possible offering was produced. And so you're mentioning a moment ago that the operators seem to be stumbling their way through the early, onboarding of new technology and integrating it in with tactics and techniques that are present at the small unit level. That's by design. Like, you have to start that at that level. And we don't mind showing that in the Battle Lab because it increases our credibility, because that is exactly what a unit will go through anytime it's attempting to integrate a new technology into otherwise pre-existing and tried and true infantry tactics, right? So that's intentional. And then it goes iteratively, not only within each episode, which is a scenario or a battle lab, it goes iteratively across seasons and inter-season, right? So we expect that as we continue to, iterate on which new technologies are being integrated into the battlefield, that it will continue to improve over time. And that's a credibility building exercise, showing that it's okay to fail. And in fact, it should be expected to fail round to round or run to run or battle lab to battle lab, because that's exactly the same process that our customers are going through.
So a question for both you guys here, because the series is interesting and entertaining. So a lot of people are going to consume that, but you guys run companies and you just happen to be doing this like on the side. So just to kind of cut through the noise, what is the perfect outcome from this show? Like, what is the phone call or the email or the process where you'd be like, that did it, we reached the right people and this is moving forward?
I've got a quick answer to that, Phil, but would love to hear about it from the Jeddoc perspective. The ideal in my mind is that we, a technology company, field a better product, and we can point at the events or the learning points throughout Battle Lab experimentation that improved our technology in certain ways. So I think that is a win, that we deliver products that are influenced and informed by the Battle Lab experience. The second is that we have an increasing number of not only other technology companies wanting to get their tech involved with the Battle Lab and thereby experience that same product development uplift that we are experiencing, but we're actually now getting calls from and participation from active duty U.S. Army Special Operations units and others who are recognizing the value of having this kind of high-paced force-on-force test and experimentation venue or arena that will directly inform their ability to project force into the world and prepare for the modern and future fight. So in my mind, those are the value propositions that would imply a win scenario for us. Phil, what are you guys tracking on the Jeddoc side?
Yeah, you nailed it, Garrett. It's the Department of War gives us a call and any supporting elements of it. And that's because, what is our mission? Like our focus is to develop and help develop the best products. But part of developing the best products is integrating them with whatever the solution is. And so our value proposition is that tactical integration. And that's not always about software and hardware or hardware on hardware. It's also about what are the right tactics and techniques to solve whatever the problem is. And so ultimately, that's what gets Jeddoc out of bed every day, is what is the tactical level problem, but how do we solve that by putting a tech stack on top of it? And it's not always the technology itself that's the solution. It's how you employ that tool as well. And so for us, this opportunity is, how do we figure out what the right doctrine is? What's the right way to task organize? What's the right way to actually employ a tool? But also, how should we think about procuring that tool as well? And so that's ultimately what we want to see or disrupt is encouraging an asymmetric approach. And that is, how do we help these capabilities proliferate that impose greater costs than what they cost themselves from a financial standpoint, and that also we help soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines not think of this as magic, but get over that hump and realize that all technology is a tool. It's not a silver bullet. And they're more than capable to be able to employ it themselves, but also to adapt it, to modify it, because that's largely the problem. The change of technology right now is too quick for that to be outsourced just to vendors and to field service reps. The actual soldier has to take ownership with that to a degree.
So, Phil, with that, I'm interested in, and Garrett, interested in your take on this as well. But when I think you're talking about disrupting was the term you used, I was going to get there eventually. So disrupting, and we know that the military, the government is very slow for adapting new technologies. And this is an area where it's been challenging for me to see how it would actually work, because there was an example year and a half ago where I think 173rd rolled out their brand new drone that could drop a grenade. And the internet just said, "What are you doing, man? This is outdated by 2 years already." So it's daunting to think about trying to pitch tactics, techniques, and technology that is changing week to week. So how do you guys, but the alternative then is you just ignore it, put your head in the sand and pretend like we're not going to deal with this. How do you guys address that? How do you pitch, somebody like the Department of War that they can get on board? Is going to take a while, recognizing that next week there might be a bit of a different spin to that. Yeah, Phil, if you don't mind, we'll jump over to Garrett.
Yeah, it's the Battle Lab framework. Like it's taking an experimental approach that is also aligned with competition. And so it's really first and foremost starts with how the U.S. military is approaching training. And then it quickly jumps to operational as well. But it's combining this, I'm gonna take a deliberate approach to experimentation. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean like I'm gonna buy a bunch of things, I'm gonna give it to like a transformation and contact brigade and let them try it out for a little bit and then give me feedback. It means that I establish exercises that have an operational end state, and that I run lots of iterations that are focused on that operational end state. Because anybody can go out to a field and figure out whether a drone flies from X to Y, or whether or not its power consumption is going to be at whatever rate, or play around with Betaflight versus autopilot. Like anybody can go do that from a technical standpoint. The reality is, why do you need that drone? Like that's the first question. Why do you need that? Well, what kind of advantage does it provide you? What operational effect? How does it help you achieve the mission? And that framework is what the Department of War needs to change overall, and empower units to be able to go and approach training and exercises in that way. And then latching that technology there with it all. Because what we see is a bunch of venues where it's this technical checking of the actual technology, but it's not focused on the operational instinct. It's very simple. You just look at whatever your operational environment is, you replicate it, then you assign a mission, whatever that objective is, and then you segment it. You don't just try to do the whole thing from start to finish, all 5 phases of the operation. You segment that down and do high degrees of iteration. You increase complexity with it on. It's that simple. But you don't have to call it the Battle Lab, call it something else. But that's what I would advise to the Department of War.
I do love, Phil, that you're plugging Battle Lab as the solution. I'm all about that, 100% behind it. Preston, I'm reminded of an anecdote from my service as a Marine Reserve officer in very recent history. I won't describe exactly the number of years ago that this occurred, but it's far too recent given world events. I was put in charge of a basically like an internal consulting team that was going out to service level training exercises within the United States Marine Corps. This is like, big service level events that are certifying units as ready to deploy at some level, right? And so these are major events, and this is well after the advent of drones. Like Armenia, Azerbaijan had already happened. The ISIS fight with drones had already happened. The Russia-Ukraine stuff had already happened, right? And I was surveying an infantry company in the defense, and they simply were not looking up, right? We could fly a drone directly over their heads at a kind of enough standoff to where it wasn't quite audible just yet, but they didn't even notice, right? We were flying many drones, like consumer grade drones over defensive posture, and they weren't even paying attention, right? They weren't looking up. And I was thinking to myself, God, we are going to get outmatched, right? If this infantry unit goes into combat right in an asymmetric or in a pure adversary competition or a pure adversary conflict, like we are screwed, right? So that's one anecdote that points me in the direction of like, you got to adopt something. And then to your other point, which is like, how do you encourage this adoption when tech is iterating so quickly and the rate of technological progress and integration with TTPs like we see in Russia, Ukraine, or elsewhere, Iran, it's happening so fast. Like, how do you even keep up with it? Well, the Department of War can't, especially not when we're in a state of, peace in quotes, right? We don't have ground troops anywhere in a conventional sense prosecuting war. As soon as we are, the iteration process and cycle will get tighter and faster.
Yeah.
But short of that, like, how do you ensure that you're keeping up? You can't. So you have to optimize around like blocks of learnings from very fundamental to very advanced, and you have to kind of accept that we're going to be a couple years behind on a grenade dropping bombardier drone. We're just got to accept that
right now.
But we got for now, right? For right now, but you still need to like make that incremental progress and lay the foundation. So at a minimum, Marines, look up. Like the drone threat is real. I consider that kind of like table stakes. And then you kind of go to the next phase, which is every unit needs to get comfortable working with digital technologies and robots. Like you just have to, even if they're outdated, you just have to get used to those entities, those capabilities, those assets, those tools, to Phil's point, living in your environment. And then from there, like you got to make sure it's not disrupting TTP application too severely. You need to work on the integration there, but you don't need to get all the way into like full autonomy, swarm, single operator, 10 kamikaze drones. You don't have to get there just yet, but you got to make some progress. That should be the end goal, but you kind of got to accept that you're going to come up short.
I feel like there's been a lot of pushback on this so far, that this is not going to be needed in the United States, or they watch. I mean, Russia, Ukraine is just a great example because every day there's thousands of videos and you can see in real time what drone warfare could look like. What are you guys seeing in terms of pushback of we don't need that, or we don't need that yet? Or, I mean, one that comes to mind for me is we regularly hear air superiority. So, well, that is a different conversation. And, the Taliban still laid IEDs under air superiority, still conducted ambushes under air superiority. I'm pretty sure they could still put an FPV drone on target. But in terms of pushback you guys are receiving, what does that look like at this point?
I've got a comment. I don't know if this directly touches on your question, Preston, and I'll make this short, but the first thing is like, this is a major deterrent to putting ground forces into any geography, right? The counter drone, especially for the dismount, is that threat, the drone threat is so significant that it will make decision makers, policymakers, military, planners think twice, 3 times before really considering putting a ground force deployment into any geography. And I think we're seeing that. This is my second point. I think we're seeing a hesitance or reticence, not only because of the kind of no forever wars movement going on in the United States, but in Iran, like we actually do still have drone or air superiority, right? Even though Iran is a quite prolific manufacturer of low cost, kamikaze drones. The Shahed drone is an Iranian thing, but we still have air superiority. We have completely dismantled the conventional air defense capabilities in Iran, such that we can fly strike missions at will alongside, combined force partners, well within the geography of Iran, with very low threat to American aviation assets and human beings, even though we've had a shoot down or 2 or whatever. Ratio there is so off. 10,000 plus, targets prosecuted over the course of the last 6 weeks or whatever. So air superiority is still a thing. We can achieve that. And then I think the second item here is like this: the drone threat is going to deter ground force involvement in basically any geography.
Interesting.
I think there's Garrett obviously said some brilliant stuff there, but I think there's so many different ways to unpack this because unfortunately, like the incentive structure within the U.S. military industrial complex makes things a lot really messy. The point being is, to the warfighter, all that should matter is mission success. And I am optimistic, and I know for a fact through experience, the U.S. warfighter figures it out when there's a sense of urgency. in SOCOM, we were using drones back in the de-ISIS fight. We developed them because we were tired of getting blown up we were tired of running through a breach and having a suicide vest detonated on us. And then we were tired of losing dogs to sending them in. So it was like, why don't we just drive a little RC car in there with the charge, or why don't we fly a drone in with the charge? That was way before Crimea was annexed, or the Ukrainians became prolific with drones. So the U.S. has had an edge here and an understanding in it, but we're failing to continue to iterate because there's not a sense of urgency or a cost to do it. But when the U.S. warfighter is put in that position, there is. I think the impetus here is, how do we do it when we're not, the cost isn't loss of life and casualties? And that's what we're really trying to do, is inspire people to make that change now before we're encouraged to do it because of casualties or the inability to accomplish whatever mission with it all. And I think that goes back to kind of like my final point, which is there's a lot of U.S. defense companies that don't have an incentive to encourage this innovation because they're very happy to continue to bring the systems that they have to bear with it. But it's on the individual soldier, and especially the leadership within the Department of War, to start being ruthless about the only reason they exist is to have that effect, operational instinct that helps achieve our instruments of national power. Right now, if we don't make that innovation or adaptation, they will not be able to provide options, and they will fail when they're asked to perform. And that's unacceptable. And it doesn't matter what vendor is manipulating the incentives there.
You guys are kind of both talking about something that I feel like we're dancing around the edges, but it's that we have very smart people in uniform, and our junior soldiers across the force can like come up with the craziest stuff. Some of it is going to be impressive. Some of it's going to be batshit crazy, but they have the ability to do that. And I think we get stuck in this. We look at, people will say Russia is innovating, Ukraine is innovating. And I was over there a few months ago, and like, it's the soldier. Like, it is literally an enlisted soldier coming up with a different drop mechanism in a 3D printer at the company level. That's the innovation. It's not some multi-billion-dollar drone company or something. And we have that across the force. There's probably more of them. Garrett, I hate to say it, there's probably more in the Army than the Marines.
Just a population. That's just a population problem. The per capita talent in the Marine Corps. Well, we don't need to get into that conversation.
Conversation for another day. They're out there. We know they're out there, but we don't have a process really in place right now to where, like, a soldier in the 173rd can solder some new clip onto a drone and use it to lethal ends next week. It's right there in front of us.
I've got a hot take here. This is exactly why CEOs who are part of like multi-billion-dollar, fully abstracted from conflict companies, this is why general and flag officers who sit back in a rear area in a joint operations center, this is why like acquisitions professionals who, again, all these people are doing their best in their roles, but acquisitions professionals who are, sitting somewhere on the Atlantic seaboard, this is why like never been to combat entrepreneurs who have never actually like held a weapon, been fired at, returned fire, had to navigate contested crazy terrain. This is why those personas are never going to be the ones that come up with the decisive technological and accompanying tactical and technique stack that'll make all of that effective in the hyper tactical environment. Why is that? Well, necessity is the mother of invention. If you are charged with putting your body and the lives of the human beings on your team, your squad, your platoon, your company into harm's way to your earlier point, hold terrain, go in there, contest terrain, hold it, defend it, right? Advance the cause in a piece of terrain. If your life isn't on the line, you really have no business opining on what the technology and TTP mix should look like. You can enable that once you've learned it from that type of persona, but like those kinds of decisions about TTP updates and augmentations and the tech that goes along with it, that should not be a top-down imposed problem. I think you have to fully, at some level, decentralize and defer to those people in the tactical edge environment whose lives are on the line in the conduct of operations.
For those in uniform, Preston, I think, though, it is also a degree of humility. And what do I mean by that? And it's switching like the mentality for how training is conducted and assessed. The the E9 class, the flag officer class has to get out of the model of, and frankly, it's the 05 and 06 as well, of, hey, I have the answer. I'm now grading you on the right way to do it. Everyone just needs to acknowledge, and this isn't because they're illegitimate leaders. It's because the pace of change is so quick. Has to take a piece of humility, or at least a dose of humility, and go, hey, I did great things in the military. I have experience, but that experience actually is becoming less and less valuable because of that pace of change. So I have to have the humility to test and experiment. And so you brought up in season 1, like how we did some really silly things. And we did that, and we did do that intentionally, which is like 2-man CQB. That's insane, especially for like the structures that we have. If that's that level of experimentation, if you don't push the limits there and like actually try, you don't really know. But you have to have a feedback mechanism. The old model of, hey, the sergeant major standing there or the colonel and like, oh, check. Oh, you did it right. You didn't do it right. You didn't do it right because on Objective X, back 20 years ago, this is how we did it. Well, maybe there's probably some good uses and fundamentals there, but also how have things changed? And then what's the other feedback mechanism you have in order to provide that? Whether or not that tactic, technique, or tech was useful or not. Because it can go the other way too, which is like, oh, it takes a silver bullet on everything. We've got autonomous swarms. Okay, maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. And if we're really honest, also it just changes across environments as well. So there's just so much complexity to it. It's the experience is just less valuable. So everybody's got to take a dose of humility with how they approach it.
I want to go the positive route here. You guys have worked with a number of different organizations and units at this point. When we're talking about the flexibility to adapt and incorporate new technologies, have you noticed any unit or any branch of service in the U.S. military that you think is doing it better and kind of leading the way in that regard?
In my mind, it kind of comes down to 2 general categories, and each has their own kind of pace and maybe positive and negative examples. There's the conventional force, which is like the big Marine Corps, the big Army, 18th Airborne Corps, 1st Marine Division, that sort of thing. And then there's the special operations community. I think the special operations community is always probably years ahead in terms of its ability to conceive of new TTPs and technology, adopt them at some amount of scale, battle harden them. They're usually kind of a training ground or a prep ground before conventional force adoption happens. That being said, there are a number of units in the conventional Army and in the Marine Corps that we think are doing things more right than not. 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, which is an East Coast light mechanized reconnaissance capability. It's probably similar to, well, I won't even make the comparison here. But anyway, I speak Marine, I don't speak Army. They have been testing and experimenting with drones, tethered, untethered, small, up to, group 1 or class 1 to group or class 3 for 10 or 12 years. It's been kind of a long run there, enabled by labs and other kind of experimental capabilities out there in the Marine Corps. That's an interesting one to look at. And then I would say just generally the 18th Airborne Corps in big Army, and maybe specifically, the tick brigades that are being well resourced to go after interesting next generation or current generation problems, and to augment and change and experiment with the table, of organization, table of equipment, and get after that. You see big experimentation scenarios like the Scarlet Dragon Fires exercise, which is joint fires, and it's all 18th Airborne Corps stuff, and that's all in service to tick brigade deployment, which probably means that the elements of the 82nd Airborne that are now in zone, sitting off the coast of Iran are much better positioned than they would have been without similar adoption waves. So Phil's probably much better positioned to comment on the soft side of that, but that's my take on the general purpose kind of conventional side of both the big services in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased. SOCOM is doing a very good job with this transformation and experimentation. They're also resourced well to do that, and they're afforded the opportunity to do that. Plus, I think naturally with TheaterSoft, they feel the sense of urgency a little bit more because they're working with partners and allies in a more consistent and persistent manner as well. But there's a downside to that too, which is those adaptations and innovations are occurring focused very much on soft mission sets, and that that sometimes misses and is blind to what's applicable to the maneuver fight. So I'll give you an example. We're involved with a couple counter UAS efforts that are focused on electromagnetic spectrum. The solution counter UAS wise is very soft centric. The reality is the solution that's being developed for counter UAS is probably more lethal and useful when it comes to a brigade, especially the field artillery battalion supporting a brigade, because it's sensing Q-50 radars, fire direction centers. It's doing the same thing of it's sensing that electromagnetic spectrum in order to enable some sort of fire prosecution. And so even though you're like, all right, counter UAS, sauce pushing that, it's probably more lethal to that conventional element with it. And then conventional elements that we're seeing do really well. I'll just give them a direct shout out. The 101st is doing a phenomenal job with it, in my opinion. The raid, the cell within the 101st that is assembling drones and modifying them at that division level. It's got some very talented warrant officers that come from the aviation world, and they're doing this assembly. The downside that they have is how do you scale it? How do you scale that production that they're doing? But it's awesome that they're doing that, and it rhymes so much with what's going on in Ukraine. I think it's going to be really interesting as more and more as companies, different tech companies, partner and go after the approach instead of trying to build platforms themselves and realize that drones are just a commodity and help enable those elements like the raid. I think you're going to see some magical things happen with it all. Then what 3rd Brigade is doing with the raid as the tick and like General McIntosh out there first, there's some really interesting and cool stuff going on there. We get it. It's just fuel needs to be put on the fire, in my opinion.
I like it. It's a lot, guys. Garrett, Phil, appreciate you guys talking through this. And thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm in the category over here on the internet where it's people just opining about what we should be doing. And I wish the United States would learn, and that does nothing. Makes a lot of noise. You guys are out there actually taking that action and putting your money where your mouth is and trying to bring these technologies to our warfighters to save lives. This is awesome. This is very, very important. So genuinely, thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for taking the time today.
You bet, Preston. We've got a set of kit ready for you for the next battle lab. Come on out.
Let's do it.
Thanks so much, Preston. Appreciate it.
Guys. All right, so thank you so much to Phil and Garrett for taking the time to walk through all that today. Look, it's no secret that it is a bit of an uphill battle to get any sort of significant change through the Pentagon, especially in a short period of time. I mean, this type of adaptation to the modern drone environment, like we can't afford weeks, months, certainly not years. We have to do this now. We have to do this yesterday. And fortunately, we've got great people like Phil and Garrett kind of beating that drum day in and day out. So again, for those interested in checking out the work that they're doing on Vet TV's Battle Lab, you can check that out at the link in the description below. 1 free month with promo code Preston. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see y'all next time.